listening to a excellent presentation by Amara Strand. I will, of course, link it below, regarding two minds. You have two different minds, and you're using the wrong one. This one really speaks to me right now, which is wonderful, because these things that are foundational, it's even a first principle thing, I believe, to me, because this is so foundational and critical to our life that this is one of the things, one of the lessons that I think should be one of these first principle, first things that we integrate into our knowing and understanding and everyday process in living our life, because we in fact have two minds. We have the original, the foundational, the what she calls the first sense, where most people would defer that to intuition and the like, which would be the sixth sense and the like, downgrading it way below everything else, way below our basic primary animal senses and physical senses. But the first sense, and that certainly holds true for me, the first sense, the first voice, that still soft, still quiet voice that comes from within your soul speak, whatever you might want to call it, however you might want to frame it, it's that first step. It's that first initiation, instigation, iteration of a thought process. And what we don't realize, and what's interesting about this, I'll probably get into, is how it's mirrored and echoed in the real world, as everything else is. Anything that's happening within, of course, the macro is mirroring the micro. As above, so below, as within, so without, that kind of thing. So this whole notion, which of course holds true with everything else in our reality, the duality, the polarity, the yin, yang, the left, right, the up, down, these opposites necessary to our human experience, to how we live out our lives in this realm, at this time, in this material existence. Everything has a duality, a positive and a negative charge, right? So when it comes to our mind, or our minds, we have the knowing, the true, the still, the calm, the present one that is always present and with us. And we have the superficial, the artificial, the synthetic overlay. And now you can probably see how this mirrors out in the world and how it's represented in different ways in technology and the like, especially in today's modern lingo with AI, artificial intelligence. We have knowing, information, data, stories, history. We have lore, we have mythology, we have lived history, we have living memory, and then we have this artificial synthetic overlay that purports to be a more complete, a more organized, a more prolific, a more integral and resilient source of knowledge and information. And in a certain light, in certain perspectives, that can be true, but only in the superficial, physical, data-driven, technological perspective, because it isn't true, it isn't wisdom, it isn't living memory, it doesn't have the nuance that is the spiritual, the metaphysical, the soulful. It doesn't ring of authenticity, reality, and truth, even though it has a lot of useful information, even though it presents or has access to, in general, the bulk of human knowledge, creativity, history, media, entertainment, music, everything that could be fed into the system, anything that this synthetic overlay could be trained on is out there. And yet what we find, regardless of your source or your favorite particular AI service, what have you, they are very much programmed to behave in a certain manner. They are very much working within boundaries, with blinders, with coding, with paradigms, with ideology, right? They're very much working within an established set of very controlled and curated parameters. So it can provide us useful starting points. It can provide us a collation and a synthesis of ideas and information. But it could also, and this is perhaps the most insidious thing, if you don't ask a question in the right way, or with certain specific parameters, you will not know that the answer that you are getting, the information that you are getting, just like what you're putting in Google searches and the like before even AI, it was more and more and more curated and controlled information, right? Based on sponsors, based on what the company and their philosophy and ideologies were. It's never been a level playing ground. It's never been open and free and honest, right? Because at some point, they decided it was far more profitable to control the narrative, to control what kind of information you get, and therefore control narratives, stories, mythology, and which websites would show up. And now with AI, it's far more insidious, because when I log into my particular ChatGPT account, and anybody, if we ask the exact same question, we would get different answers. They might be close. And if I added one word differently, give it a predefined sort of definition or a boundary or a specification, or preset a certain belief system even, or tell it to respond within a certain, like a personality from a classical philosophical perspective, a strictly observational science perspective, a mainstream narrative, what's taught at Harvard perspective, a completely free of any mainstream paradigm, free of any established narratives perspectives. You see where I'm getting at? The content and information that we're going to get as an instant result is going to be curated, catered to, and relevant to that very, very subjective question, that very subjective prompt. And one word differently, how you word it, how you ask it, the conversation that can evolve from it is going to be completely different from person to person to person, from even though you're trusting it to give you fair, honest, open, true, and accurate information. It will to a point. It will default to certain things that are acceptable. And of course, it is coded and designed to keep you engaged and to keep you there as long as possible, even if it's not showing you ads and the like. It's still engagement. It's still metrics. It is still training and learning from all of your inputs. And depending on the settings of your account, it is saving in memory specific things, your specific tendencies, propensities, beliefs, and the like. So too, keep you engaged in certain ways. So too, right? Keep your belief in it, that it is useful and that it is practical and that it is giving you what is real and true about our world. And if we're not awake and aware and paying attention to the fact that it has an inherent bias, that it has an inherent ideology to it, that it has a certain gatekeeping element built right into its code, we will be very, very easily misled, and very quickly. Because if you get into a conversation, it will prompt you or lead you in a certain way of asking questions. It will lead you and guide you into the next question. So I think you see where I might be getting at here. Just as this AI will lead you down a certain path if you're not paying attention or flat out ignoring its follow-up kind of responses and prompts, you very quickly can be pushed into a particular way of thinking, in a particular way of perceiving something, in a particular avenue of research or analysis, right? Whether or not that's something you would consider misleading or misinformation, even disinformation, that's completely subjective, up to you, right? Based on what you know, how much you know about what you're looking into, and how much you're just going to blindly trust the data and the information that is being offered, especially if you're relying on, again, one central source. For decades, people have relied on Googling, and they absolutely made that such a efficient and useful business model that it essentially became substitute for the word research and searching and looking into and, right, studying something. Just Google it. And now we have AI, which is obviously the next iteration of that, but it is essentially a glorified Wikipedia. And of course, if you've been paying attention, you know that you can't trust Wikipedia as far as authentic, real, true information, true data. It's a starting point, and if you're serious about learning about something, you can't stop there. Because That information is wide open to anybody to manipulate and reformat and misrepresent whatever the hell they please. And unless somebody actually goes to the trouble of verifying that information, which, if it's the same indoctrinated or brainwashed community that's doing the verification, that's relying on the same curated and modified and redacted source material, again, this is the same idea with peer review and that nonsense that happens in the scientific community. If it's all the same people, the same minds, the same propaganda, the same system that's being gate-kept and controlled, you're just reaffirming the same misinformation all the way down the line. You're affirming the ideology, the beliefs of all of those people who have been trained and indoctrinated in the same way. And living in the inverted clown world, this is a dangerous practice, because if you're not willing to challenge things, to criticize things, to think critically outside the box, outside of established narratives, you're not going to really learn about what is authentic, real, and true. And now we bring that back to our synthetic mind, that overlay, synthetic overlay, which of course applies to the individual, you and me, and to a community, a society, a collective, a civilization. It's the same thing. And we can look at these things as egregores in the greater sense. I'm not sure if we can have a personal egregore, but the idea is in a community or society or a nation, a certain reality bubble that operates within a certain established narrative, within a certain sociocultural boundaries and established myths and stories, even the language that we speak wherever we are in the world, that's contained within a certain parameter set, within a certain established consensus reality. And an egregore is more leaning into the parasitic type of things, because it is something that's heavily manipulated and coerced. And it's this common belief system, this entity, this energy that grows out of consensus reality, out of propaganda, manipulation, social engineering, and the like, right? So individually, we have our first sense, our original mind, our true knowing, which gives us information instantly, quietly, without question, without bias. Then we have the synthetic mind, which Amara outlines quite wonderfully in her presentation. So I'm paraphrasing and butchering it a little bit, so I would urge you to listen to her presentation for getting into specifics and really understanding how this all works, and really understanding how to learn to start controlling it and respecting it for what it is, but also getting back control from that cyclical thinking, from that repetitive thinking, from that loop thinking, from that infighting within yourself, right? From that polarizing notion, from that constant battling with yourself, that constant mood swinging type process that happens seemingly out of your control, but it's not, right? We can learn to regain control of these things. We can learn to alter our perspective and to put these notions and to get a hold of this synthetic overlay idea so that it can be used by us, but it doesn't simply use us anymore. And that's what's important both on the individual, societal, and civilizational level. And the only thing we can really do anything about is our personal version of that, our individual version of that. And anything that we can overcome in that regard and learn to take back agency and authority over, to learn to understand the triggering effects, to learn to take back the power and the creative force and all the energy that it keeps sucking away and wasting on our behalf if we're not paying attention, and all of the repetitive thought loops and all of the reactivity that it is doing on our behalf based on the information that's coming out of the world, and from the world story, from the events, from the fabrications, the manufactured crises, and the like, everything that's coming at us that goes through this synthetic overlay before we even have a chance to take that information in properly without filters and bias, to hear what our real first sense, what our true voice, what our actual inner truth would have to say about it, which is instant, right? Without filters, without flags, without bias, even if it is uncomfortable to hear. It's truth. Even if it is counter to what our synthetic voice would try and justify, rationalize, make easier to palate and swallow, right? Make easier to comprehend before the inevitable internal arguments begin, before the before the inevitable yeah but, right? Before the inevitable filtering and regurgitating and repurposing of that energy that initially had a purity and a simplicity and a organic nature about it. Even without words, it was a sense, right? It was just a knowing that goes beyond belief, ideology, interpretations, beyond our language and words. It's a knowing. It is before all that, right? And that's what she explains quite well in her presentation. And the obvious parallels in the world that we can immediately look at is the idea of social media, right? Which is just another inversion. It's antisocial, if anything. It's polarizing. It's curated. It's an algorithm that shows you specific things based on your activity, based on your browser activity and what you do in other apps on your devices, because it's surveilling all of this data, all of this information, and then that gets fed into your social media stream, and that gets fed into what it's going to show you through the algorithm based on your likes, based on what you've commented on, based on all of your previous activity. So again, it's not open and free. It is very individually curated to keep you engaged, to keep you reacting, to keep you getting emotional, to keep you sharing the memes, good, bad, or ugly, to keep you in that system, whether or not you're paying attention to what you're doing and being deliberate and aware and conscious of your actions. And it doesn't even matter if you're doing it 5 minutes a day or an hour. I don't know. Some people can spend every other minute clutching their device, and the second their mind wants to deal with anything, or the second the world is offering something, or the second any inkling of boredom might come into their headspace, into their state, into their mindset, into their mind space, they'll open up an app and start scrolling. This is simply another aspect of that synthetic overlay, right? It's a habit, it's an addiction to certain chemical reactions, that the dopamine and the other things that you've heard about, the substitution that social media is regarding interpersonal communications and the like. But it's not real, right? You're seeing an extremely narrow point of view, an extremely narrow representation of what the world actually is, because again, it is curated. It is one single line, one single stream. It doesn't represent the world in any real way. Similarly, the synthetic overlay, the second mind, what someone like Gad Saad would probably call the parasitic mind, is acting on your behalf, is inspiring you to react, overact, or to be passive, or to be acting in avoidance, deferring, procrastinating, delaying, because you just don't want to deal with that constant noise. And even though the noise isn't suppressed by trying to avoid it, because that's not controlling it, that's not training yourself to understand how it works, how it relates to your first sense, your real mind, your real truth. You're simply letting it play out its noise. You're simply letting that overlay dictate your behaviors, beliefs, and actions and behaviors out into the world. It's disempowering, right? So you always have that fatigue, that worry, that anxiety, that whatever it might be, generally going to be leaning into the negative, which is an endless energetic supply for whatever that synthetic aspect of you requires. And it can essentially feed off you for your life, until you become aware of it, until you learn how to understand it, until you learn that it is artificial, that it is simply an overlay, and that it doesn't actually have any power over you. Until you realize that it's simply the chatter. It's an overlay. It's not the real story. It's not the true you. And again, that's how we see it playing out in the world, right? We see consensus reality. We see how an entire society, a culture, can be manipulated and driven into a certain mindset. We see how the manipulators and the storytellers and the narrative controllers and the like, social engineers, whatever you want to call them, can inject ideas and essentially create that mob rule, that mob mentality that moves an entire society in a certain direction because of fear, paranoia, and essentially ignorance. Because if you don't know any better, and if you're relying entirely on your emotions, and if you're getting beaten over the head with certain specific and repetitive messaging, you can't help but eventually fall into these traps, because this is working on a subconscious level. And until you get a hold of that subconscious thing, which very likely mirrors this whole idea of the synthetic mind, because it knows your innermost secrets, your innermost worries and fears, right? It knows your blind spots, because it is you. It's a mirror. It's an aspect of you. And so it will introduce these noises and these discussions and these internal battles, and it will drain you day after day after day until you realize that you can actually get a hold of this thing, that you can train yourself to understand and appreciate what it is, and to take back that energy that's being wasted, that psychic, emotional, spiritual energy, metaphysical, whatever you want to call it, that very much, it's a human thing, as Amara says. So you don't have to think of it in any woo-woo sort of sense. It's a very fundamental, first principle thing about the human experience. It is a polarity thing, and it will polarize you. It will divide you, and it will keep you at odds with yourself until such time that you acknowledge it, recognize it, name it, and learn to take back the power. Your knowledge of it and your experience and your practice of reorienting to your true voice, to your first sense, will dispel any power that second mind, that second voice, that noisier synthetic overlay will have over you. And I think we can all benefit from a greater awareness of that. And that's why I wanted to speak briefly about this and share that particular presentation that Amara did, because in my view, it's certainly timely for myself, but also it's one of the most important things that any of us in this modern era can gift ourselves by learning to understand the nature of this synthetic overlay, because it's happening within us individually, and it is very much being mirrored out in the world in every other way, especially through technology and the screens and these inputs and these devices, and the way that we communicate to each other in the day-to-day, the way that the world is being presented to us through the media, through the news and the like, from governments and all that. These are synthetic overlays. They're not real. They're not based on what is authentic, real, and true. And to get to that, we have to realign with the first sense, with the real mind, with the authentic nature of who and what we really are. So listen to that presentation. She outlines some basic exercises, and of course she has further offerings on her website, further courses. Take back that noisemaker, take back that agency, take back that authority, and dispel that noise so it doesn't drain you every day, so it doesn't unnecessarily and unduly influence how you're experiencing this life. Because again, as we know with any of these parasitic sort of things, it'll take up anything and everything that you want to offer it. It'll eat up every bit of energy that you feed into it, whether it's emotional, psychological, spiritual, etc., psychic. And if you can't get a hold of it on the individual level, you'll very easily fall into the traps of the community, social, and, societal, civilizational level. You'll easily fall into that egregore, that overlay, that synthetic overlay that pervades throughout society and the collective. Start at home, as usual. Start inside you, and then you'll start to realize and recognize how it's playing out in the world around you. Have a good one.
It's been coming down every other day, but they tell me we are in drought season. That's not my story, not my reality. No matter what you force my eyes to see, and the sky is falling right on top of me, but they tell me